Good afternoon Morgan and welcome back to the channel. In this week's episode we're doing a complete subframe refresh and taking this sorry looking piece and turning it into something a bit more acceptable. So doing a short recap from last week's episode, these are all the parts we took off the subframe, but we're only keeping the lower wishbones and the clamps for the anti-roll bar mount. Everything else is getting it binned and replaced with some shiny new parts, which we'll see in the next episode. But for now, I'm starting off with the subframe, and I picked up this soda blaster thanks to the recommendation of M539 Restorations. It should clean the aluminium without damaging it. First thing we need to do is load up the container with some of this soda material, which in actual fact is basically looks like table salt, and well, I don't like to admit that it tastes like table salt. However, if you ask my non-existent twin, he might admit to tasting it. So before we get started for real, I thought I would test it on one of the scrap pieces to see how the soda blasting works. And then the long winding road of blasting this entire piece begins with initially what looked to be really fast, and you can see that some of the dirt is coming off really quickly, but other bits are not. What I really learned here was the only thing that worked was persistence. As you can see, I was wearing full PPE, and to be honest, I could only do this for short periods of time because the noise and the atmosphere was just getting quite tough. But like I said before, with persistence, it all does come off, and you just have to tackle the easy bits and move on to the harder bits when you have a bit more energy. So about halfway through, I took a break and came back to it the following day when I had a bit more energy and carried on the same process, tackling the easy bits and eventually getting through to the harder bits. And I wish I could fast forward this whole process for reality, but it was just persistence was the key. There was just no other way to do it. But the good thing was the results became pretty apparent. The aluminium was reacting well. It wasn't getting damaged. You can see the dirt still lies underneath, but the bits that I have done came out quite well. And then eventually, after another period of hours, the entire subframe was ready to move on to the next stage. There's really nothing like buying new tools. In this case, I bought a couple of specific pullers for the E39 bushings and also a universal bushing puller set. Now we're turning attention to pulling the old bushings out of the subframe, and we're starting off with the differential bushings, which came with a specific tool. But one of the important things is to make sure there's plenty of copper grease on the threads, which will prevent them from marring as you pull the bushings out. And I may or may not have used an entire tin of copper grease doing this process, but again, you'll have to ask my non-existent twin about that. So pretty straightforward process, just pushing the tool into the bushing and it comes off with relative ease. And the different parts of the tool you can see as I pull them off. And then this is the differential front bushing. Again, another one of those while you're in there parts to replace. So moving on to the other two differential bushings, they're slightly larger, but again the tool comes with specific parts for this job and they come off again relatively easy. And yeah, lots of copper grease. And rinse and repeat for the other differential bushing. Now we're tackling the four main barrel bushings, and I had to buy a special tool for this. This comes with a bracket and a thread, and this puller bracket actually fits underneath between the subframe and underneath the barrel bushing. and you can see that plenty of copper grease yet again, but feeding the thread through the middle. There's a cap plate which is also threaded, and once you attach the bearings to the top below the main nut, then you can actually start to apply pressure in the middle of the bushing, and the bracket holds the entire puller and pushes it against the subframe. And as you can see, I start to apply a little bit of tension onto the thread, and as it starts to tighten, it starts to pull the bushing upwards. And all that WD-40 I put in episode 3, you can see must have done something, because the bushing actually came out with quite relatively easy. And it gave me a bit of a fright when it eventually popped out of the subframe. But here you can see the construction of the puller, and I've got to say, this thing just worked like a treat. I actually was so worried about this process. After watching many videos on YouTube, it just looked to be quite difficult, but to be honest, with the subframe out and this puller in tow, the bushings all came out relatively easy, and you can see the scale of these things. And here's some of the aftermath of the subframe that I'll clean up later, that the soda blast didn't get into because the bushing was in the way. So same again on bushing number 2. Still give me a fright. And this bore also needs a bit of cleaning. Bushing number 3 needed a little bit more torque, but it came out as well. And by this stage, I'm sure you're sick of watching bushings coming out, so the last one only took a second. I wish. And if you're not sick of watching me clean this subframe by now, thanks for putting up with it until this point. But I promise these are the last few clips of me actually cleaning the subframe. And it's just a matter now of cleaning up the bushing bores, making sure that they're smooth enough to accept the new bushings. And the same for the differential mounts. Again, I just used some Scotch-Brite to clean up the bores. And after diff mount, this is the third one. And now finally we have a completely stripped and cleaned subframe ready to be rebuilt. Soda blasting duty's ready to step in again, and we're cleaning the lower wishbone. But this time we're going into fast forward to make this process a little bit easier to watch. And with one side done, a quick before and after shot to see actually the difference between the existing parts and the cleaned parts. And to be honest, I was getting a bit lost in the soda blasting experience, and I forgot what these things looked like before I started, so I was quite happy to see this. So let's get rid of all the bits we don't need and just keep the bits we do. And the last things to clean up here are the anti-roll bar clamp brackets. And the soda blasting is relatively soft enough to be able to hold the bracket and blast at the same time. But I wouldn't recommend doing this for any larger parts, because my non-existent twin may have hurt his fingers doing this. I was sure glad to see the end of the soda blasting. Although it did a great job, it was quite tough. And all the soda ends up on the ground, which is easily brushed up and then washed away. But this stuff gets everywhere. Now it's the turn of the wishbones to get their bushings removed. And you can see that I mark the orientation of the existing bushing to make sure that the new bushing goes in the same way. And my twin tried to drill this bushing out to great failure, so we're going to fix that mistake here as well. So the bushing puller will actually work quite well here. And here's how the original bushings look in the subframe, and they all get marked up. And then clamping the wishbone to the table just gives a bit more stability while using the puller tool. I was late to the WD-40 party on these parts, and you can see the difference here. Moving from the standard ratchet to the torque bar, these bushings were really fighting me. Again, persistence works here, and the inner part of the puller is pushing the bushing into the outer part, and you can actually see the bushing in this small gap here. And then I pull the tool out halfway through, and you can actually see then the bushing starting to come out, and the puller tool working quite well actually, I have to admit. And then Mr. Persuader just gets the last bit out with a couple of taps. And here's the lower wishbone bushing removed. Taking an inspection of the bore, you can see just how much the bushing was actually fighting, but persistence again is the only way to beat this thing. And then managed to find approximately 21 years of, well, dirt, sand, mud, no idea, but this stuff was actually inside the lower wishbone and I had no idea. And then I thought to myself, well, I wonder is the other one like this as well? And lo and behold, the same amount of crap came out of the other one. This stuff's been in here for at least 20 years. I can't really tell you what it is. It's like sand, it's like mud. I have no idea. And now we're moving on to the other wishbone to get the other bushing out, and it's more or less the same process. But this one came out a bit easier, and I think I may have left this to soak overnight, so it's not a bad idea to WD-40 these in advance. This is the one that I tried to drill out, but again I fixed the mistake that my twin made. Yeah, twin. But you can see the bore again, and a little bit of Scotch-Brite in this will clean this up for the new bushing. So the rearward bushings on an E39 subframe have a larger diameter than the forward bushings. And here's a shot of the new bushing compared to the old one. And here are the smaller diameter bushings on the forward side. So thinking that I was clever marking the bushings and getting ready to take this out, I had no idea of the kaputski that was awaiting me here. But why was it so important for me to tell you that the bushings are of different diameter? You won't have to wait long to find out. But here's a shot of the bearing pack that's used to help spread the load. And pushing the M12 bar through here, I forgot to put the copper grease on. So that was easily remedied. And this smaller diameter thread, I assumed it would go the same way as the larger diameter thread, but kaputski coming up in 3, 2, 1. Smaller diameter thread, similar amount of torque equals kaputski. So the thread didn't get marred here, it just got completely destroyed. So as you may have gathered from the last clip, I was rather frustrated by the threaded bar breaking. So I ordered some replacement in M12, M14 and M16. But this bar is with a much higher grade steel. And instead of the one that came supplied with the tool breaking, I'm expecting these ones not to break. So let's try it out and see what happens. Long story short, the two smaller diameter bushings came out like a dream. Short lesson for the books. So now with both of the bushings removed from each wishbone, it was a matter of using Scotch-Brite again and cleaning up the bores. It may seem tedious work, and well, yeah, that's because it is. But here's a before and after of the wishbone bore, and there's quite a difference actually. With not a huge amount of work, the Scotch-Brite took off the marring quite well. And once that was done, we moved to soda blasting the last set of parts, and these are the rear knuckles. And this is in preparation of removing the bushings from these parts as well, the integral link bushings. These are held in place with a small C-clip, which is pretty easy to knock out. But once we have a closer look, you can see one of the reasons why I'm replacing these bushings. They're completely kaput, going along with the theme of the rest of this Driveline. The bushing tool here is again a specific tool for this job, and there's not much I can complain about here. They worked really well. And once the puller is pulled through, the larger diameter cup can be removed, and then the bushing actually just falls out of the other end. And this is the easier parts of the removal, which I'm glad I left to the end because it had been quite a bit of work up to this point. But these specific bushing tools worked really well. Other side's much the same, and you can see here I'm not using the torque bar, just a standard ratchet. And these integral link bushings came out with quite some ease. And here's another gratuitous before and after shot of the bores with again the use of some Scotch-Brite. Finally, all of the bushings have been removed. The 4 made subframe barrel bushings, the 3 differential mounting bushings, the 2 large diameter wishbone bushings, the 2 small diameter wishbone bushings, and the 2 integral bushing links. Take a breath. Now it was time to inspect the second-hand differential that I'd bought. From the outside it looked in reasonable condition, and you can see whoever had it before had filled it full of ATF. Although it was nice and clean, it doesn't look like the right stuff that should be in there, so I'm glad I was doing this. So after draining the fluid, I removed the backing plate, and these bolts were all in great condition. Didn't take any effort at all, which was a good sign. No rust on these at all. And once I removed the back plate, I was able to see inside the differential for the first time. And I was quite nervous at this point, but everything looked good. The ring gear, the worm gear, there was no visible damage on any of the gearing, and looked good so far. So another one of those while you're in there moments. Didn't have to do this obviously, but I decided that if I was at this stage I might as well paint the outside of the differential casing. So just a matter of masking up, wire brushing the whole thing. And then brushing on a liberal coat of hammerite, which made quite a difference to the visual appearance of the differential. Certainly when you compare it to the original one that was on the car. So taking the 90mm OD 80mm ID bearing tool, it actually fitted the seal of the output shaft perfectly. It meant I could use it as a drift and a depth measuring tool for the seal. Knocking out the output shafts was fairly straightforward, and the splines also looked to be in great shape, and I was able to check that the bearing depth was the same on this differential as well. Rinse and repeat on the other side, and again the bearing seal was in exactly the same place. So now just cleaning up the little bits of rust that I couldn't get to before because of the output shaft. And a little bit of effort goes a long way to improving the appearance. Now I was ready to replace the output shaft seals, which started by removing the old one. This needed a little bit of persuasion, but not too much. And with a little bit of editing magic, we can clean the bearing faces quite easily. Then around 2 tins of brake cleaner to clean the inside of the differential and also to get rid of that ATF. Mr. Rhymes to the rescue with a new bearing seal, and he kindly also provided a C-clip for the output shaft. Woohoo! So according to BMW, this is the recommended differential oil gear, and you can see it's quite different in colour to the stuff that I took out, so I'm quite happy that I did this. But just a little bit to lubricate the seal before it goes into the differential case. And the trusty bushing tool comes out once again to act as a drift. But the nice thing is, because I'm marked on the edge of it with the marker, I can see exactly how deep the bearing seal should go. And to prove the point, here's a shaky 360 of the drift showing the position of the new bearing seal. YouTube magic fits the other one. And while you're in there, you might as well clean the output shafts. They didn't look particularly dirty to start with, but after cleaning this one and doing a quick comparison with the old one, I was a little bit shocked to see actually this brake cleaner really works. Once the other one's cleaned up, then we just finish off the restoration of the differential, and that pesky ring that I forgot to paint is now painted. Then we need to remove the masking to clean up the gasket face. And here's another gratuitous before and after. Can't get enough of these, to be honest. But you can see the inner gears are quite clean looking now. Then I managed to find some not cheap BMW adhesive, because they won't sell you the paper gasket anymore, for the back plate. And I didn't forget to soda blast this either, but just on the outside. And to remind you what the inside face looked like, here's another gratuitous before and after. Just elbow grease employed here. Now we get to squash all that lovely adhesive with the backing plate and just a couple of new bolts to hold it in place while I get the other ones in. With some beautiful torque wrench music. Somehow this differential refresh was a lot of work and I didn't really do anything, but it does look a lot better. And that's all for this week's episode, but tune in next time when we stop ripping things apart and we actually start putting things back together again. Consider subscribing to the channel to find out more about the 530, as there are a few more episodes to come up. And in the meantime, there may or may not have been a new car purchase, but you'll have to keep watching to find out. See you next time.